So in January, we celebrated our 5-year anniversary. So this is some of that. Command Action does a lot of things, but the most important thing that we do is we advocate for common sense gun legislation across the country. We want to make sure that our legislators know we care about this issue, and we want to make sure that they act on this issue. So while we do parades and we have other activities, we also go to the state capitol. We advocate at the capitol. I don't know how many of you saw it made national news, but Advocacy Day, I think I'm now 3 weeks out from Advocacy Day, had 1,800 people at it. So this is where we started, that first Advocacy Day there on the left-hand side. I was taking the picture, and that group comprised the entirety of Moms Demand Action at the Capitol that year. The group there on the right is just from this last Advocacy Day on the 21st. So what have we accomplished? We've done a lot of the same things that Indivisible is doing every day. We go and bird dog people at town hall meetings. And this was actually from Johnny Isaacson's town hall meeting this past summer, where we all sat for an hour and a half with our hands up, and he had to actively ignore all of us to not ask a question of, we wanted to get him on the record. And that's something we want to do with all the legislators, just like we've done with Sanford Bishop. And he is a very tough nut to crack. So just to say he would actually consider some of those things that you asked him is movement in the right direction. We've delivered gun sense postcards to legislators. We've made phone calls in support of gun sense candidates, which we will be to get closer to elections. We actually have a program for candidates on any party, any affiliation that agree to fill out a questionnaire. And if they meet sort of the responses that we're looking for, they'll actually be given a distinction of a Moms Demand Action gun sense candidate. And then from there, we'll actually be endorsing candidates out of that pool of folks. Something else we're working on. So elections do mean a lot to us. Right now, I think there are about 8 moms members across the state who are currently running for office this election season, either at the federal level. Here are some of the legislators we've met with. We've talked to every candidate for governor that will agree to have a meeting with us. You'll see we had David Perdue there and Mr. Cagle, as well as some friendlies and some not so friendlies. Every year we go to what we call Gun Sense University. The leader, which I'm going to ask some of you to consider joining tonight, goes and gathers at one place around the country. This was in New Mexico a couple years ago. And the leadership learns how to do what we do better. So how do we age more people? How do we make sure that we're reaching out to communities of color and communities of gun owners and veterans? And because we know we need everybody's voices in this. So when we go to Gun Sense University, it's not only this collection of strong advocates, it's also an opportunity for us to learn how to do what we do better. Every year we host a Wear Orange event. I think Lydia did a tabling event this last year here in Columbus. These are some pictures from our Athens event that we held out in Athens this past year. Wear Orange was actually started as an honoring of Hadiya Pendleton. She's a teenager who had marched in President Obama's, I believe, second inauguration. And 2 weeks after she was home, after being in Washington, D.C., she was killed in her South Chicago neighborhood. And it came time for her birthday in June, and her friends decided that they wanted to have a way of honoring her. And so they had a balloon release of orange balloons because orange was a color she loved. It's also the color that hunters wear, so that when you're in the woods, other hunters can see you. So now Wear Orange is now National Gun Violence Prevention Awareness Day. And so we host events all over the country, and we've had, 5 or 6 at a time just here in the state. So that's something else we're looking forward to, is the beginning of planning for Wear Orange for this June. This year, one of the things we got to do was a quilt. We call it the Mother's Dream quilt. Lots of states have started producing them. These are pictures from both Athens and Atlanta. We had quilts in Atlanta, Athens, and Savannah, which are the three main groups up until 3 weeks ago, where we now have a lot more active groups. But all of these are being put together, 48 blocks, some in honor of people who've been taken by gun violence, others from moms who just have dreams for their children to grow up either on campuses without guns or, you know, in classrooms where they don't have to do code red drills. And those are going to be shown around the state. So Columbus will actually get to host the quilt here and present a presentation if you guys want to. We marched in Pride. We've done this the last 2 years in Atlanta and have a great turnout and always get a great response. So Pride isn't the only parade we march in. We've marched in the East Cobb Parade, and if there's, you know, any opportunity here, that would be a great opportunity as well. It's a lot of fun. I like this picture because this really describes why I do this work and why most of the people in my group do this work. It is about the kids you see in that picture. We do this because we want our children safe. We want other people's children safe, and we want to make sure that, you know, the lawmakers here, that we believe that's the reason that the gun lobby needs to stop their support of, you know, common sense gun reform. There's nothing we're asking anybody that's going to restrict anybody's reasonable right. That we're not against the Second Amendment. We're actually pro-Second Amendment. I grew up in a house with guns. I actually go skeet shooting. It's something I enjoyed doing, and I don't want to take that away from anybody. But I do think universal background checks so that every gun sold in this country has a background check. That's not too much to ask. A responsible gun owner, and most responsible gun owners agree with us. In fact, 75% of NRA membership agrees with us on that point, that there shouldn't be a gun sold in this country without a background check. But they're right there, that's the reason we do this. We also have this great program called Be Smart, which is completely non-political and non-partisan. It is about making sure, if you are a gun owner, that you are being a responsible gun owner. How do you store your gun? Are you making sure that it's locked, unloaded, with the ammunition stored separately? Are you making sure when you do use your weapon that you're doing it and modeling it responsibly for the younger people in your home? Are you asking when the kids go to other people's homes for play dates how other people store their weapons? I have a very close friend whose son went to Savannah for Easter holiday, and she got the call no parent ever wants to get, that he was 14, the young man who found the gun loaded was 15, and they were playing thinking it was no big deal, and her son is no longer here because of it. So it's on the onus of adults to make sure that if you're going to own a gun, you have to be responsible with it. And Be Smart is the program that talks about that. We actually partnered with the National Sports Shooting Association to put this program together. That's how committed we are to making sure that, gun owners can be responsible and know how to store their weapons. We estimate there's about 1 million to 2 million children that live in homes right now with unsecured guns. This is some of the leadership from across the state and in the Atlanta area. We get together often for big events in Atlanta as well as across the state. I would like to get to the point where there are that many people in the Columbus leadership as well. Some more pictures from Lobby Day. Lindsay here on the left was the former chapter leader. She's a gun owner and a veteran. She goes at least once a week to the gun range with her Glock and practices, and then brings it home, makes sure it goes back in the safe, and makes sure the ammunition gets locked up separately because she has 2 small children. This was a Martin Luther King parade in Athens with some of the Athens team, and they've been doing some amazing things with a very small group, which is what I know Columbus can do as well. Athens is also holding a march for UGA as well as Atlanta. And just so you know, there is a $5,000 grant for every march, so make sure you apply for that if you haven't already.
That's if you're a 501c3 or a organization like that.
Yeah.
And we're not.
Yeah. See if you can find somebody to partner with you. So the things
Valley Episcopal Ministry might partner with you.
Yeah, because I would love to see you guys be able to benefit from that. Just so you know, every town has committed, and Moms Demand Action has committed with all the fundraising we've done, that every march across the country is eligible for up to $5,000 to help offset the cost of the marches. There will be 10 marquee marches. Atlanta is one of those, which they will fully fund. And then all the other smaller marches are eligible for the grant. So what's next for the Georgia chapter? Well, we've been growing, as you might imagine, in the last 3 weeks by leaps and bounds. I now have a new Gwinnett County group. I will be having a new Cherokee County group. We are starting a Fayette County group. We want to grow the Columbus group, obviously. But the state-specific priorities we have for this year are 3. Legislative, which I'll be really honest, didn't really go anywhere. The legislators are due to end here in about 3 weeks. None of the gun bills, bad nor good, made it to crossover. So there was a domestic violence bill that they killed and never voted out of committee, which would have prevented people who've been convicted of a misdemeanor domestic violence charge from getting their hands on guns, but that didn't go anywhere. Bump stock ban did not go anywhere. But on the good note, neither did permitless carry, which was one of the bad bills that had been introduced by several different people. So at least for the time being, even though we have no training requirement, which was also a piece of legislation that went nowhere, at least to get a permit to conceal carry, you will still have to undergo another background check and pay a fee to be able to carry. Our Be Smart program, which I talked about a little bit earlier, is something we really want to grow because we know here in Georgia that guns are a way of life and that people have grown up in homes with guns, and hunting has been a big part of that. We don't want to take that away. Like I said, we want to make sure, though, that Be Smart message is spread across the state to try and reduce the number of unintentional child deaths. And then lastly, domestic violence and guns. How we make sure that people who shouldn't have guns don't get them. And domestic abusers are, a lot of the mass casualties that happen in this country aren't the ones that make the news. They are the ones that are typically a family. And so we want to work hard on that. And how do we, address the link between domestic violence and guns? So some of the things that we need for Columbus, this is for the Atlanta team, but for Columbus, we need a legislative team. We need a faith outreach lead. We need an events lead. Lydia is your local group leader, but she also needs a membership person and a welcome call person. So there's lots of different positions within the local group that need to be filled so that we can do more work here in Columbus. Somebody who's willing to help start planning for the Wear Orange event in June so that it can be a really dynamic, which is really exciting. We have chapter fundraising, which is great. We are about $1,500 from our goal of $14,000. We do have educators for gun sense. Many of you are educators. You can text the word educator to the number 64433 and become a part of our educators for gun sense. And then we also have now students demand action. And you can text the word student if you're over the age of 13 to that 64433 number and sign up for students demand action. So I brought some pledge cards today with me. There's 2 per page. So what I'm going to ask is for you to make a commitment today to help Lydia and to help me grow the Columbus group. You can pledge to attend the Wear Orange event. You can join the Wear Orange planning committee. You can join the welcome team and make new calls to volunteers, become a Be Smart presenter. Bring 5 friends to your next meeting, or join the Gun Sense Action Network calling team, which calls people who join through the Every Town or through the Moms Demand Action National page. And those people regularly call all over the Southeast to welcome new members to our organization. There's lots of ways to get involved. Letters to the editor, volunteering at tabling events, participating in local campaign activities. You know, if Sanford Bishop seems like he's willing to come around and start, you know, being interested, and I would love to get him the information on becoming a Gun Sense candidate and see how he chooses to respond. I don't even know what the questions are, and they're doing that purposely so that we can't lead anybody or give any answers. But, you know, I would love to give his campaign the information on how to become a Gun Sense candidate. Work with the State Be Smart League. They didn't vote on it. Campus carry, they did not introduce anything to either strengthen or weaken it. Carry did not, again, pass out of committee. Basically, nothing happened on any one of the bills that we advocated either for or against. Bump stocks was dead on arrival, no pun intended. Domestic violence had a committee hearing but never a vote. There was an assault weapons ban that Moms takes the long view of that, which is the last time there was an assault weapons ban, all the manufacturers had to do was change a pin, literally a pin in the firing mechanism, and they had worked around it, and it no longer applied to the next class of weapon that came out. So that wasn't something that we actually advocated for. It's not something we don't support. It's just not something we feel is particularly helpful to getting, you know, legislation that will make a difference immediately passed.
So they're really still around. They're not going there. They can still be brought back up, though. It's just say for next year.
Yeah, next year is a new legislative session, so they will be reintroduced under new bill names. This past year was an extension of the 2017-2018 legislative session. So some of the bills that had been in committee last year that never made it out kept the same bill number and continue to move through the process. Next year, a lot of these things will be reintroduced. They'll just have new bill numbers attached to
I
them.
think that was permitless carry.
Yes.
Last year.
Yep.
All right, and then my last question is, let's understand, how can the NRA sue the state of Florida over these legislation that's just been?
So the question is, how can the NRA sue the state of Florida for the enactment of the legislation that Governor Scott just signed?
Well, didn't they sue just specifically on the age limit?
Yes. Yeah. So they sued specifically on the age, and what they do is the NRA has what I'll call super members in every state. And so they managed to get a member of their organization who must be in Florida and is probably somebody between the ages of 18 and 21 who would have the right to contest the law, and the NRA is suing on their behalf, saying that the age restriction is unconstitutional. So I hold that there are lots of things we don't let 18-year-olds do. You know, we don't let them drink. You know, they have a limited permit license until they're, you know, able to show that they're able to do, you know, drive a car responsibly. If they've had an accident, you know, under the age of 18, I think that's extended a little further. There are things that we limit. And so it'll be interesting to see where this, where this lawsuit goes. Anybody's guess at this point. But obviously it will start in the state of Florida, and we'll see what happens.
So I think if I heard you correctly, the NRA sues on behalf of someone who's made a complaint that was discriminatory in nature between the ages of 18
and 21, right. So yeah, they can't sue in and of themselves unless they have what I will call jurisdiction within that. So they have to have somebody in the state who's contesting this as being, you know, unconstitutional and against their own individual rights. Yes, ma'am.
I've got 3 or 4 questions. I'm a mother, but my children are in their 50s.
That's okay.
Do y'all have a coalition? What other groups do you work with on gun issues?
So it really depends on the state chapter.
In Georgia.
In Georgia, we work with an organization called Outcry, which is a majority of faith communities, mostly centered in the Atlanta area, but my understanding is they have branched out across the rest of the state. There are a lot of pastors and committed people of faith who are members of that group. There used to be the Georgia Gun Sense Coalition, but they've kind of faded out, and most of their members have either gone to one or the other. But we partner a lot across,
LGBT.
Thank you. I'm having a hard time talking today. When we do Pride, so we look for community. In fact, that's the community outreach lead person that does this. We look for committed groups and individuals and businesses who support the work that we do, that we can find a partnership with. So Indivisible has been a great partner. In Atlanta, we've got several, I'll call them more progressive groups, the Pave It Blues and the 159 Together, groups that, support us. And in fact, that's where we did a lot of, before Parkland, a lot of our recruiting for folks to come to the Capitol. So we look for other groups and organizations who have similar, ideas about who should and shouldn't have guns.
2 other things. We're sitting here, nobody that I've heard has mentioned Parkland. That has changed the whole country. I mean, I'm online all the time, and I take the New York Times at home, which is my huge splurge. I read that every day, and I read other newspapers online. Why aren't there more people here? Did Parkland just not affect Atlanta?
No, I think Parkland had a big effect on Atlanta. And this is something that we see with every event like Parkland. We always see a spike in membership growth. We always see a spike in interest, but usually 3 weeks, 4 weeks out from it, the interest starts to wane. I won't deny, but I'm thrilled to see as many of you here tonight as we have. So that to me makes me very happy. Parkland has changed things. I've been doing this for 5 years. My 5-year anniversary is literally next month. In the 5 years I've been doing this, I can say that this time feels different to me. This time the students speaking up for themselves when they finally were like, okay, you adults have done this long enough and you haven't done what we needed you to do. Now we're going to be the ones that are going to take this over. I think they're close enough to the voting age at high school that the politicians are willing to start to listen to them. And the other thing I think is changing is that, and I am still in awe that those kids going through what they were going through in that immediate moment had the presence of mind to videotape on their phones what was going on. We've never seen that before. And the day I saw it, I posted it on my Facebook page and said, if you can watch this and not do something, you don't have a soul. Because you can't listen to those kids in that moment and not want to do something. And so this time does feel different, which I think is a huge reason why Florida got something passed. It might not be perfect, but it's something, and it will make a change.
The last thing I want to say, you may know Rusty Oliver, and everybody else here may know him. But if you don't know, stand up, Rusty. He's a candidate for Congress in the United States. That's his job every day. He wrote a fabulous piece about opposing guns in the classroom from the view of a teacher who loves his children. If y'all haven't seen it, find it and read it. And if you have money, give it to
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. Two things have been going on, or I may have discovered this week. Number one, the Harris County Chamber of Commerce is running a raffle for 30 guns in 30 days.
Oh, my God.
This is their 6th annual 30 guns in 30 days. And in full disclosure, I live in Alabama, just across the river. But I would love to see Mom's Demand go to the legislature and ask the legislature, first of all, raffles themselves are supposed to be against the law. You can get an exemption occasionally to do one, but I would love to see the statewide chapter of Mom's Demand to ask the legislature to outlaw raffles of guns in Georgia.
That's an excellent idea.
And I would also encourage you, if you live in Harris County, to express your outrage to the Harris County Chamber of Commerce. If I were a member, I would demand my money back. But at any rate, that's one thing that's on my mind. The other thing is no NRA money for candidates. But on top of that, no NRA money for public schools. I've had a conversation on Friday with a member of the Muskogee County School District School Board. Columbus High School and Northside both take NRA grants to buy the rifles that are used in their competitive rifle programs.
And that's pretty typical across the state and across the country.
And I would like to see us start in Muskogee County. My suspicion is Harris County probably does the same thing. By the way, the gun raffle for the Harris County Chamber of Commerce, a portion of, I would love to see us petition the NRA to fund programs in public schools. The school board member that I talked with was pretty defensive about it because she said that those competitive shooters got college scholarships, et cetera. She alluded to many of them taking a career path to the military. And my position on it was that other competitive teams hold yard sales, bake sales, whatever.
Absolutely.
To fund their competitive activities. And either Muskogee County should fund those activities for its students, or they should have to raise their funds the same way everybody else is, and not with NRA money.
Yeah. I agree with you more. My son played hockey, and so we had poinsettia sales and all kinds of things because it wasn't a sanctioned sport in the state of Georgia, but we found a way to make sure that the kids in high school got to play if they wanted to.
It's like band, if you had a kid in band, you had to raise all the money.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, sir.
I do have a suggestion with regard to raising the profile of the state chapter as well as the local group. Every Saturday from 9 to 12, the market days on Broadway. We go around and they have the applications. We started in January. They're starting to take a picture of where the sites are, so they're going to fill out nonprofit, 501c3,
Which we are both.
Tables for free. They just have to make sure that, so go on the Town Columbus site, and there's a page for market days on Broadway, and contact them. And, you just have to fill out an application form. If you're a non-vendor, but a 501c3 before you can. So it's filling up. So the one condition is that you cannot miss 3 consecutive weeks. So you have to show up on a regular basis.
So who here will commit to helping table at least every other week? Got one? Anybody else? 2? Even if you can do it once a month and kind of rotate it through, that would be awesome. So there are commitment forms back in the back, mark tabling with your name.
And if I can add one more, the event that you have for June 2nd, the Blue and Orange, that does correspond with the local pride.
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
I do public relations for the organization, so we are sending out requests for sponsors. And so there is a fee to help defray the cost of the pride, but
Okay.
We're gonna do
Yes, sir.
Yes, a few questions and a comment. Is this like, given this is Georgia and you're the head of Moms Demand Action, have you heard of the Iron Pipeline?
Yes.
Yes, and basically, if anyone hasn't heard of the Iron Pipeline, is basically like how so many of these guns end up in places like Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia,
Correct.
and they.
So can everybody hear what this gentleman is talking about?
Oh.
So the Iron Pipeline is a term that we use to talk about states like Georgia that have very lax gun laws. And basically, it's a lot of different metropolitan large areas where guns are funneled to New York. Specifically, Georgia funnels a lot of guns up through DC, basically up I-95, I-85, and I-75. So a lot of the gun crimes that happen in New York City, quite honestly, are committed with illegal guns from the state of Georgia and from other surrounding states like South Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama. Chicago, actually, a fair number of theirs are funneled through Indiana, which also has very lax gun laws, and Missouri. So the Iron Pipeline is sort of those routes that take illegal guns and distribute them to states that might have very strong gun laws, but they're being circumvented by the states that don't have strong gun laws. So whenever anybody throws Chicago in, my face, I'm like, well, yeah, that's because Indiana doesn't really care how many guns go into Chicago. So
right.
And
that's it. And that's the thing when it comes to like people of color and how like people who are pro NRA, who are I don't want to say conservative and what have you, but they're pro NRA, like to the hilt, they will bring up Chicago as a red herring in order to say that, oh, well, you don't care about the lives in Chicago. What about my gun rights so that I can defend myself from, these super predator type people and stuff? And of course, that's a term. But when I see it, I see that there's a real lack of concern from a lot of people who profess, a care for Chicago, a care for for people of color in these economically blighted areas that get these guns from places that have like big gun cultures and big gun economies, like Indiana and surrounding areas, and they just use it as a red herring.
they do.
Right, and they use it and it impacts people of color disproportionately. Where I see stuff like what happened to the guy in Minneapolis, the one who got shot by the police officer when he said, "I am a gun carrier," but yet he got shot, and that video and his murder was shown on Facebook Live and everything. Like going back to what you're saying about people showing like the effects of gun violence, like on Facebook Live, on Snapchat, etc.
Right.
And even I see like the video from Viceland talking about kids in Chicago teaching each other how to stop gun bleeds, where they if they encounter someone who's been shot, what is the first thing to do? How to stop how to stop a gun bleed or
actually done a really marvelous job of researching stuff. And if you ever want to know anything, if you go on everytown.org, all of the research, which is where that's basically what Everytown's job is now, is to research all of this. They've actually come out with something called the Urban Gun Violence Report. And it really talks about gun violence and how it affects urban communities and sort of the different aspects of, how other communities are addressing the problem of urban gun violence. Something as simple as finding sort of rundown spaces with abandoned homes where gun stashes are, there's actually a thing called a community gun. It's literally a spot where they stash a gun. Everybody in the community knows where it's at, and when they need it, they go get it, and they take it, and they use it, and then they come and bring it back and put it back there. So something as simple as creating a community garden in a spot that happens to be known as a stash site actually can help improve not only the gun violence, but food deserts and all kinds of other issues that are happening in our urban environments. violence.
All right.
So that's certainly something, if you're interested, definitely read up on that.
All right. And just one more question too.
Okay.
Have you heard of Advanced Peace out in Richmond, California?
So that's one of the groups that is actually cited in the Urban Gun Violence Report. You'll find a lot of different ideas. And that's one of the groups.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Could you elaborate on the grants that you talked about? One part of 24th March?
I don't think so, because I've got somebody else in the chapter who's in charge of that, but certainly worth looking at, still doing. But I know there is a deadline coming up quickly. I don't know exactly what that date is.
How do we approach that, or how do we investigate that?
So I will forward Lydia the information on all the March stuff and how to make sure you guys' March is registered as an official March. It is? Okay. You should have some information. Okay.
We weren't able to apply for it.
Okay.
But now you're saying that we collaborate with someone else, we need to be able to. So that's
Yes.
good, and I'll look into that.
Okay. Yeah. So definitely. Yes, ma'am.
I have a short comment and a question.
Okay.
The short comment is that there are so many reasons why we need to done this. But one I rarely mention, is I think it's important, is that this is costing us a lot of talent in this area.
Right.
Costing us a lot of talent and a lot of money, because for every gunshot victim, they estimate that the cost to our hospitals and our communities is about $1 million a person.
But it's not only the people that get hurt. I just want to put an example for myself, and I don't think I'm all that. But
Right.
working in the area for 7 years, for various reasons, one of them is the guns. I'm a professor at CSU. It took a lot of money to train. You know, I studied in Italy, and you have an accent from Italy. I studied in China, I came here. It took 7 years for CSU to teach me everything I needed to know. I finally have tenure and promotion. This will be the prime, right? That's when I really will get to pay back to the community. I used to be the link with the school district, right? I'm one person, but there are so many like me that are leaving. So I'm going to England. Why? Because I don't want to be waiting for that phone call. I don't want to live with the doubt. Is today the day I receive the phone call from school, or this was going to happen in my classroom?
Right.
And I don't want to live with the certainty that they are already shortchanged because of this. There are worse teachers, there are less people applying to jobs here because of the guns. And so my question to you is there any way to frame the argument, even with representatives or in your publicity, is one that is not just confined to safety, although of course, nobody denies safety is a big thing, but
Right.
it's about who we want to be as a community, the kind of people we want to attract, the overall mentality that we have. Because it seems to me that argument, together with safety, could really make the overall discussion a much more poignant one and hopefully more successful.
And sadly, that argument has been made multiple times by me, actually, in front of the legislators who were considering campus carry. We've seen in Texas, who enacted it before we did, a considerable drain on their talent from an education standpoint. And my son goes to Georgia Tech. It is one of the premier universities in the country. And we knew we were going to lose good talent from across the state at our state university system schools. And we brought that to their attention, and they looked right at the chancellor when he brought it up and basically said they didn't care. So if you want my personal opinion, here it is. And this is just Andrea Teichner, Georgia resident. Until we actually take down somebody like an Alan Powell or a Rick Jaspers or
Who are those people?
so Alan Powell has been the Speaker of the House in the legislature. He's a big Georgia Carey guy. Rick Jaspers is, again, a Georgia Carey fellow who is also a state representative. Josh McCoon, anybody Josh McCoon's constituent here? Until we get the Josh McCoons and the Rick Jaspers and the Alan Powells, all it's going to take is one or two of them being voted out of office. And they will see that this is a winning issue to get on the right side of.
Valerie Haskins sitting right there.
I'm running for Josh's seat.
Blocked me on Twitter because I've trolled him so.
Hey.
So that's awesome. Yeah. When one of those guys goes down, and one of them, and it's made clear to them that the reason they're going down is because of their votes on things like campus carry and the RIFRA stuff that McCoon keeps introducing. And I could go on and on, but you know, when it's made clear to them that that's not where Georgians want to be, you know, then change will start to happen. Yes, ma'am.
This is just a little late. I'll say this, I'm reading this way, but I taught them.
Oh, wow.
My darling boy. And he's going to run for Secretary of State.
Right. Boo.
He won't be our senator. But when we were in Atlanta, what day was that? The mom.
The 21st.
Thank you. We couldn't find him. We had to track him everywhere. He wasn't on the floor. He wasn't in committee. He wasn't in his office. Anyway, that's 6 of us. And we left a note. And mine said, "Josh, we're coming for you."
Haha.
Look, that had to be hard. It didn't mean anything.
Right.
We do need to come for Josh.
Hmm.
We do.
Hey.
Yes.
Hi, I want to thank you for being here and for all the things that the moms do. I'm a mom and I'm a grandma.
Mhm.
And, you know, something, I wonder what your stance is on the Dickey Amendment and the CDC. I think it's called the Dickey Amendment.
Yep.
But, you know, that just really just irritates me so much. I mean, we do research on some, you know, lawn darts and,
Mhm.
Yeah.
you know, everything
So-
on cars, our automobiles, you know, have improved so much because of all the studies. So how can we, you know,
That's another thing that we would love to see change. So the question is about the Dickey Amendment. Even Mr. Dickey no longer supports the Dickey Amendment. So the Dickey Amendment, I think was passed back in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
80s or late 80s or early 90s. And it basically cut off any funding for the CDC to study gun violence as an epidemic. You know, if the flu killed as many people every year as guns did, we would have a vaccine in outside of 6 months that would completely wipe out the flu in this country. But because of this Dickey Amendment, the CDC was cut off from that funding. So now most of the research that happens with private funds at universities and through everytown.org. So that's where that's happening. We would love to see the Dickey Amendment repealed and money actually given to the CDC to fund actual real research on gun violence in this country. And we think that some likely solutions would come out of that research, or at least a better understanding of what might be a workable solution. So, any other questions?
well, I just want to go on to that. I think that, you know, sometimes if I try to think of a solution for gun violence, I don't have it. I'm not an expert, but, you know, and I haven't studied and I don't have the data. And I think to have that data would be so important in coming up with the solutions that would really work.
It definitely would. The data would help. But I will say that part of what's making now different from 3 or 4 weeks ago isn't so much data, because guns are a very emotional thing. People who've been raised in a hunting culture, it is a very emotional thing. It's part of their childhood. It's part of their growing up. So it's a much more emotional thing that for a lot of people, I could give them all the data in the world and all they would still see is that I'm going to lose part of my culture, part of my growing up. So I will say it's also emotional. And how do we change the culture of the emotions we feel around, hunting or, any of those kinds of things that we all loved from childhood. I grew up fishing. That was the thing I did with my grandparents. They took us fishing. So, it bums me when I go somewhere out of state and I have to get like an out of state fishing license when I just really would just love to stand there at the bank and just cast and reel in and cast and reel in. But I know that every state has their laws and that I can't do that. It's the same kind of thing with this issue. So we are changing the culture though. And again, that's the difference I feel in and about this moment in time. Yes, sir.
So I know you're probably voice is probably going out. So I'm going to talk for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
My name is Mark Davis. I'm actually running for the Alabama State Legislature. And I was filled out the questionnaire for Moms and Action this morning. So I hope you guys get the results.
Awesome. Please don't share what the questions are because we do have other candidates that I want to.
I'll meet you after.
Yes.
Big city, but no sensation.
Cool.
So piggybacking on what you just talked about, a huge component of what we do as liberals and progressives is we talk about things from a care perspective. We care about kids. This is what you were talking about. We care about kids in school. We care about our victims of domestic abuse. We care about victims of assault. They should not be shot. Fundamentally, that's what we're all here for.
Right. Right.
People who are whatever terminology you use, don't reject that. But they also think about things in a different way than we do.
Right.
They think about things in terms of, this is my family history. This is what I've grown up with. This is how I understand it. So if we can take that conversation and say, yeah, I know you care about your kids. Let's focus on something that's personally impactful to them. Right? The other thing I was going to say is I got a letter from the NRA this week telling me that if I didn't fill out their survey questionnaire, I'd be given this dreaded question mark and I'd be considered possible second crimes. I told them to shut up. They said if I don't give the survey questionnaire, then I'm going to get a question mark rate, which means to their members that I'm possible second.
That is A+.
Right. I told them to shut up. Here's my website. Here's my position on gun control legislation. If you want to read it, do your own damn research. I'm not doing it for you.
Okay.
My challenge is to these two things here. Say the same thing.
Yes.
You want to take a position on gun violence, then stand up for the group that supports honest, good legislation. That isn't about killing the Second Amendment. It isn't about saying nobody should have guns. But put in responsible goals. People who want to understand these machines, these tools are only built for one purpose, and that's to kill.
Right.
With the animals, too many cases of people. So that's my challenge.
Yes.
So one thing I would say is don't use the word control. Because we aren't about controlling. We are about reforming. So gun violence prevention, great, use that. Because if you're against gun violence prevention, who are you?
Right.
Common sense gun legislation and gun reform. Those are the three words that I would prefer everybody use to talk about this term. Because again, I'm not trying to take away somebody's rights or control what they do as a responsible gun owner. So, but thank you very much. There are lots of different types of long guns. And in fact, Moms is going to be hosting a phone call that's actually going to talk about the terminology. And I will make sure that Lydia has that information to share with whoever wants to participate in this national call. But basically, I, again, grew up in a house where my dad had a single action bolt and a double barrel shotgun for duck hunting. A semi-automatic rifle is what most of these, what I would call military style weapons are, can also be a rifle that just looks like a bolt action rifle. And what it is that a semi-automatic weapon, just like a pistol, has a cartridge of ammunition, and that ammunition clicks into, the firing mechanism. And as you pull the trigger, a bullet is shot. When you release the trigger, the mechanism loads the next shell. You pull the trigger again, the next thing is fired. You release the trigger, the next shell is loaded. So it's really the look of the rifle, and those that look like military weapons are the ones that everybody gets kind of upset about. And again, one of the ways that the gun manufacturers got around the last assault weapons ban, they made just a change in the firing pin, made it look like a regular rifle, and it was no longer an assault weapon because it didn't look like a military style rifle. It looked like every other rifle, but it was still a semi-automatic rifle. There's no difference in the way they actually fire or work beyond mostly cosmetic. Does that answer the question? I will have to look it up. We're actually doing two of them. So I'll get Lydia the information and forward that on.
And then my second question was, what is Mom's Demand Action Volunteer? That would help us organize our event on the 24th.
So they're the red cards back there with the blue on them are the things that we advocate for. So universal background checks on every gun sold in this country. Closing the gun show loophole and the internet sale loophole is a part of that. Right now in Georgia, you can go into any gun show. You can, from an unlicensed vendor, meaning this person's not a federally licensed gun seller, that this person is what we will use quotation marks to call a hobbyist. Typically, this is somebody who makes less than 40% of their income from selling weapons. You can go, and with no questions asked, mostly, you can plop down your cash and you can walk out with whatever you want without having to undergo a background check, without having to show any ID, and that's not, in our opinion, very responsible. Now, there are hobbyists out there who do ask to see ID and do, arrange through a federally licensed dealer to do the background check. But we think about 40% of the guns sold in this country are sold without a background check. So as near as we can tell, because again, there's not really great research around it. So that's one of the biggest things we advocate for.
That'll help us to guide people on what signs.
Yeah. Another thing there's a no-fly list, but there's also a terrorist watch list. Right now, if you're on the terrorist watch list, you can walk into any gun shop across the country and walk out your gun. We don't think that takes a lot of common sense. Domestic abusers, again, it varies by state what the regulations are. Here in the state of Georgia, if you are convicted of a felony domestic violence charge, then you are supposed to have your name entered in the federal background check system and you aren't permitted to buy a gun. However, in the state of Georgia, if you plead down a misdemeanor or are convicted of a misdemeanor, you still get to keep your gun privileges. So that was the one thing that the domestic violence bill that Alan Powell killed in committee was supposed to fix. So that's another thing we believe. So it's basically keeping the guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them and making sure that, every gun is sold with a background check. That in a nutshell. If we could do just that, we know lives would be saved. Yes, ma'am.
Please understand, I'm going to think about guns.
That's fine.
Terminology may be off everything else, but my life is surrounded by people who are good. Whether I work with them or I'm related to them, Carol got freaked out because my brother-in-law just casually dropped last night and he had to put guns in the house. Okay, But what I'm thinking, and what I hear from even my relatives, my coworkers and everything, is what she's talking about would be military style weapons. That seems to be common ground in my life. That, you know, my sister can look at me and say, well, I don't think anybody should have that, because then it would go to sleep. So, and it seems like talking to my husband, people and all that, it's about the magazine. It's about that, but I'm not hearing that.
I would like to see the size of magazines restricted to be 10 or 15 at the max. Nobody needs a 50 round magazine.
It would be restricted if you were dove. You're gonna have 3 shells in your gun to dove.
Right,
But you can have
So-
30 to walk into a school.
right. So yeah, we would like to see magazine size restricted. Yes, sir.
I have 2 comments.
Okay.
Number 1, the assault style rifle are modular. They can plug in different parts. You said changing one pin to make a difference. I know that there are certain types of guns that have the same capacity and same rate of fire, but they are, I know Ruger makes a long gun, but it's a long gun, it is not modular.
Right.
So maybe using the word modular and defining it carefully would help. The second thing is, what about insurance for gun owners? We have to have insurance to drive a car. And
Right now, there is insurance for gun owners, but it insures them so that if they kill somebody, they go to bat for them so that they're not held liable for that. Yes, we would like to see, you know, either a rider on a home insurance policy, you have to cover, you know, I mean,
They want
right,
liability to drive a car.
yep.
So why can't we do the same thing for guns?
because you're punishing the people who are safe with it.
Well, and honestly, it's until we start addressing some of the other things, I don't think we're gonna get there. No, I know, and trust me, there are so many different ways we could approach this that I just, every idea is a good idea. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a bad one out there just solving this problem, and, you know,
That would push a lot of responsible gun owners to be anti-gun.
it probably would.
It would probably be more friendly.
Can I ask a question here? How many here have had guns, grew up with guns? So yeah, I mean, fully half of the people in this room, you know, are at least familiar with them. If you don't still own them. What?
Responsible gun.
Responsible gun owners, that's it. I will say my dad was not particularly a responsible gun owner when we were kids because, you know, his rifles stayed zipped in there.
Because we didn't go after them.
Well,
And you better than this.
and my sister and I think, were so afraid of my mother, and my mother put the fear of God into us because she didn't like them in the house, and she basically, you know, but, you know,
But
now,
I had friends in my city died.
I did
Way
too.
back when, you know, because they were.
Yeah.
Nobody likes the guns up back then.
No.
Every once in a while, you know, some kids would get a hold of them.
Yeah, I did too. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I love monks and men action. I appreciate you so much. You know, I've done some work with the Auburn group and with the Atlanta group, and I appreciate the diversity a lot because this is really on top of everything else. It's an emotional issue, and I appreciate the Parkland kids a lot. But a lot of the reason why it's not going to go away is because the Parkland kids were the right or the wrong kind of kids that got killed for that. I mean, no one really cared when it was 20 Sandy Hook kids because they were 12 years away from voting. They didn't have
Exactly.
social media accounts. No one really cared when it was 49 gay Puerto Ricans because because of gay Puerto Ricans. And so, and the Sandy Hook kids, the Parkland kids have been so responsible because they've been reaching back to a lot of the kids that were fighting in Milton over Michael Brown and all sorts of. And also, it's a different thing when a person of color, myself, I'm carrying a gun. You know, sometimes there are people that don't want me to carry a gun, or
Yeah.
if I'm seen with a gun. I mean, my background is and I like it, so it's a big, big, big.
It is, and Moms is really committed. Everything we are doing in the Georgia chapter this year, I have committed to increasing our diversity, our equity, and our inclusion.
And it shows.
And
I'm
it's-
so grateful.
It's absolutely making sure we have Republican voices and independent voices and Democratic voices, people of color, people from the LGBTQ community, dads, grandfathers, brothers, sisters, aunts, and giving everybody ownership in this so that this Columbus group becomes what you all want to address here in Columbus, because we know we make a difference in our local communities first. So that it's definitely something that we're focusing on every single time we hold an event anywhere, is how do we make sure that we're including everybody's voices. We're also starting a veterans for demand action, as well as a gun owners demand action group. So know that those are both coming very soon down the road. Absolutely, and again, we know that NRA membership, for the most part, agrees with us. We're not asking for anything that's outside of what responsible gun owners actually say they want themselves. So, we want those voices included in what we're doing so that people like Sanford Bishop know that this is an issue he can get behind and he can support. With that, I would ask you to come fill out some commitment cards and Lydia will reach out to you and I will help her do that to grow the chapter and to get information to all of you about different ways you can get involved. For the candidates, I will make sure she gets the candidate toolkit and leave her with some information on who your campaign folks are so that she can send that to